It's amazing. I mean, that is amazing.
Are you sure your Deborah made this?
I know. I couldn't believe it either. She came up with some recipe.
Recipe?
Yeah, what?
Real cooks don't need recipes.
So Deborah can now cook the missing color in the Raymond Rainbow.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're taking a look at Deborah's Brajol from Everybody Loves Raymond. Now first up, I have some bad news. I ended up making Brajol with both this, a flank steak for the Babish version of Brajol, and these, some top round cutlets. But I forgot to transfer all the footage and now I'm on the road, so we're just doing the latter, and we'll revisit the flank steak version for when we do basics of Brajol with Babish. For now, we're making our own breadcrumbs for some reason. I had a whole bunch of stale Italian bread laying around, and why throw it away or compost it when you could simply break it up, put it in the jar of a food processor, and process it into homemade breadcrumbs. But we're not stopping there. We're going to introduce some fresh herbs into the situation, a little handful of parsley and a little handful of fresh basil. Toss those in with the processed breadcrumbs, give it another processing or two, and watch your homemade breadcrumbs turn a light green and elegantly fragrant. And there you have it, some homemade Italian-style breadcrumbs. Worth the effort? Probably not. Something that is very much worth the effort, however, is pounding out your beef if you're using beef cutlets. In between two sheets of plastic wrap they go, and getting pounded down with a meat mallet they are. Not only does this tenderize our cutlets, it makes them nice and thin, which is what we need for when we roll them up down the line. Once you're finished pounding your meat and it's all nice and thin, it's time to break it down into slightly smaller pieces. I'm going for roughly 5 by 5 inch squares. And now it's time to start stuffing these things. I'm going to begin by laying down a foundation of kosher salt and freshly ground pepper, and then I was trying to imagine what Deborah would do, so I went with garlic powder in lieu of fresh garlic, a generous sprinkle of store-bought Italian-style breadcrumbs, and then the one ingredient that Deborah mentions by name, currants in favor of raisins, a popular Sicilian addition to red meat dishes. Lastly, a generous sprinkle of freshly grated Parmesan, and then we commence to rolling. We just want to roll these up as tightly as possible, like a fat little beef jelly roll. But then we're posed with the question of how to secure them shut. Many people opt for toothpicks, but in the show you can see that Deborah clearly uses butcher's twine, 2 lengths tied at each end of each Brajol log thing, nice and tight to ensure that the fillings do not spill out during their long braise in tomato sauce. And with that, we're ready to head on over to the stovetop, where we're going to heat some olive oil in a large Dutch oven over medium-high heat, about 2 to 3 minutes until shimmering, and then we're going to deposit our Brajol, taking care not to overcrowd the pot, and then letting them sit unmolested for at least 5 minutes until a deep golden brown crust forms. You could sear them on all sides, but it takes more time, and I really think you only need to sear the tops because they're the only parts of the Brajol that peak above the sauce during braising. Once we got some nice color going on there, we're going to set them aside on a plate and take full advantage of the beautiful fond on the bottom of the pot, sauteing maybe half a large chopped onion in the residual fat and fond until soft and lightly browned and translucent. And then we're going to crush a clove of garlic in there and let that saute for about a minute until fragrant. Then at this point, it's pretty much the standard Italian-American red sauce rules. A couple tablespoons of tomato paste, let that saute for a few seconds before dumping in a 28-ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes, along with maybe half a can of water, a generous sprinkle of oregano, a little sprinkle of kosher salt, a few twists of freshly ground black pepper, and mash it all together with your favorite potato and or tomato masher. Once a marinara consistency has been achieved, go ahead and bring that to a rolling simmer, and then we're going to drop our Brajol into the hot tub. Same exact orientation as when seared. Don't crowd them, don't stack them, just nestle them into the sauce with only their browned facades facing the sky, dumping in any accumulated juices from the plate, partially covering and placing in a preheated 325-degree Fahrenheit oven for anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 hours, uncovering if necessary to help the sauce evaporate and thicken a little bit more quickly. Then we're going to test for doneness by grabbing our tiny chef's knife or paring knife and seeing if it can be poked into the beef with little to no resistance. Before we get all plated up with nowhere to go, how about we take a quick look at our cross section. For your diner's ease, you can optionally pre-remove the butcher's twine, but it could give them a fun little project to work on so they don't talk at you so much when you're trying to eat. And let's see what kind of swirl we got cooking here, and not a bad one. Currants look kind of weird in meat, but they taste pretty great. In fact, the whole thing tastes great. It's kind of like a deconstructed Sicilian meatball. I even inducted one to the Clean Plate Club before even reaching the plating phase. That said, they weren't quite tender enough, so don't be afraid to put them back in the oven for another half hour or so. Once the Brajol are done for sure, go ahead and defat the sauce. It's going to be a bunch of accumulated fat from all that meat, and like my grandma used to say, no one wants a greasy Brajol. She never said that, I made that up, and I'm sorry. As I have demonstrated a multitude of times on this show, it is best to finish cooking your pasta in the sauce. So pull the pasta when it's about a minute from being done, combine it with the sauce in a high-walled saute pan along with about a quarter cup of pasta cooking water. Let that finish cooking for 1 to 2 minutes until it has absorbed the pasta cooking water and it is properly cooked. Then we're going to kill the heat and finish the pasta with about 1.5 tablespoons of butter. I know that this is probably not what Deborah would have done, but she did not serve her braciole with pasta, so I am taking artistic license. Once the butter is melted and the pasta has a beautiful orange sheen to it, it's time to plate up. Into a warm bowl goes the pasta topped with our de-stringed braciole, topped with a little bit of extra sauce. And of course it can be served like this, but let's dress it up with some freshly grated Parmesan. And then to hammer home the Sicilianity of this dish, let's add a whole bunch of warm toasted pine nuts and a little sprinkle of freshly chopped basil. And then at last it's time to tuck in. As you can see, our braciole is now truly tender. I'm cutting it with a butter knife. And in the end, I'm almost glad that I forgot to transfer my flank steak footage because this is not a dish that necessarily needs revision. It is a Clean Plate Club member. In fact, twice in the same episode.